This is the Power Break Podcast number 184, titled Avoiding Decision Fatigue. Hi, everyone. I'm Bob Brubaker, along with JT, as we hope you'll stay tuned as we seek to give you a little power in this break to help you succeed in the race of life.
This is the Power Break Podcast, with a focus on the spiritual, the mental, and the physical aspects, all to help you succeed in the race of life. For show notes from today's podcast, go to bobbrubaker.com and follow the link for the Power Break Podcast. What's up with you, Big Bob?
Well, we're rejoicing today because, and when this comes out, it will all already have been done, but nevertheless, our website is updated. Our webmaster, Eric, put it together, and now we have JT's Corner on the website, and we have, cool. Quick links to both the blog and JT's Corner, and also the Power Break Podcast. So, thank you, Eric. We appreciate your work. You're doing a great job, and here you go. Hey, how do you like that, JT? We aren't running the video today, but he has caught the North Carolina, frenzy over UNC basketball.
Yeah, I'd say it's funny up here. I don't really think they care much about professional sports, but you better pick a college. I've always liked UNC, so I guess I picked UNC. I told Amy, I was like, feel free to pick another school if that's what you feel compelled to do, but don't expect me to be okay with it. I mean, what? What? No. Yeah. So anyway, it might be something as simple as she likes the colors better of, University of South Carolina or something. Who knows? So, yeah. So I picked a school, anyway. Folks. I took a side.
Yeah, he took a side, and, we're looking forward to seeing what JT is going to be writing on his next blog on the JT Corner on the website. Right now, let's thank everybody for tuning in to the Power Break Podcast. Thank you very much, folks. Thanks for not only listening, but also telling others, and also doing due diligence, as we say, because it really does help us if you leave us a good rating and or a review wherever you download the podcast. It helps to spread the word about the Power Break Podcast.
Yeah, it sure does. And I say it all the time, and I'm going to continue to say it because it's really out of gratitude of, how many people actually tune in every single week and download the podcast. It's just not only humbling, but it's really, it's just a really cool thing. And the fact that we can help anybody out is really what this is all about, right?
That's exactly right. And that's why today we're talking about an interesting subject called avoiding decision fatigue. So, JT, what do you think of when you hear the expression decision fatigue, and have you ever experienced it? So, what is it in your mind?
Well, I haven't really made up my mind yet, Bob. I'm not sure what that was such a softball. I was like, should I do it? Should I not do it? I know. Everybody probably saw that coming. It's in law enforcement, especially in the SWAT community, we had a saying that we needed to avoid over-analysis paralysis. And I think it's definitely related to that. What happens when you start to get fatigued with making decisions is you start to think too hard about every decision, and you become indecisive when you're doing it.
That's exactly right. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just, if you make oftentimes, as a police officer, when I went to work, I spent 10 straight hours of basically making decisions for other people. As a supervisor, my officers would call and say, hey, this is what I got. What do you want me to do? If it was a citizen, they'd be like, hey, my neighbor's doing this. What can I do? So you were really the one making decisions all day. And what I found when both Amy and I were kind of busy at work, when we got done, neither one of us wanted to make a decision, and I think we've all been sitting with our spouse and been like, hey, do you want to go grab something to eat? And it's like, yeah. Well, all right. Where do you want to go? I don't care. And it's just, you can't make even a decision about where to eat.
That's right.
And that's kind of decision fatigue. And it's really important to avoid it. What's that a sign of? And I think we're going to talk about this a lot, is that's a sign that you're not getting enough time with God. You're not getting enough time for relaxation. Maybe you're spending Sunday doing work instead of resting and being with the Lord. There's a lot of things that's a sign of. How about you, buddy? You ever get just to the point to where you're just like, man, I don't care, whatever?
Yeah, unfortunately, that does happen because as in the ministry, it's just like you within law enforcement, you end up making decisions a lot for other people when they ask you your opinion on things. And then, it's kind of like at the end of a Sunday, I'll go home and Jan said, you're not saying much. And I said, well, I'm out of words.
Yeah, you just gotta recharge that battery. Yeah.
Yeah. But decision fatigue is a real phenomenon today because, as we noted, that you're required to make so many decisions, one after another, throughout the day in all kinds of businesses. But if we're not made some important decisions ahead of time in the way of commitment, then we'll fall into the trap of being tossed around in ways that we really don't want to go, simply because we were at a point in which we couldn't decide. And we call it decision fatigue. It's kind of a biblical principle. Now, Jesus said to avoid that, he says, if you're going to come after him, you need to deny yourself, take up your cross daily, and follow me. That's called commitment. And as we consider it today, that is a fight against decision fatigue. So today we're talking about avoiding decision fatigue.
Yeah, let's continue to talk more about that as we turn to your blog. Folks, if you haven't been over to BobBrubaker.com, it is brand new. It is freshly done. It looks fantastic. There's a ton of resources there. JT's Corner is going to start coming to you live. I'll have a weekly thing on there in addition to Bob's blog. But at the very least, even if there's no books over there that you're interested in, sign up for the blog. It's free of charge, shows up every Monday, and it's a great way to start the week. But Bob, let's continue to talk about avoiding decision fatigue.
As I wrote on the blog, you probably have experienced the scenario of trying to watch what you eat, but have come to an end of a day when you didn't have something planned and couldn't decide on what to fix, so you found yourself giving in to the easy decision of just ordering pizza.
Done.
Has that ever happened to you?
All the time.
That is called decision fatigue because, as you face it, given a day when you've made hundreds of decisions, often for yourself and for others, as JT was mentioning, that at the end of the day, the fatigue sets in. You just can't make a decision at that time. It's like your brain says, "I can't make another choice," so that part of you just wants to do. That the part of you that wants to be disciplined suddenly takes a backseat to the part of you that just wants to get away with something, and you avoid denying yourself. Sadly, the results of decision fatigue can often result on things we just don't want to do, including more things than just food. I looked at the situation of Genesis chapter 3, and I would say that our fallen parents, Adam and Eve, gave into the temptation of the garden, and we're told that Eve is the one who was tempted, but of course Adam was listening in to his wife and eventually was close by, so he didn't just stand up and guard his wife when the serpent tempted Eve. But we're told that the serpent did tempt Eve, so you might say that maybe they had put off the decision. They just were in a decision fatigue state. Regardless of that, they gave into the temptation. Now Joshua, as I wrote in the article, was just warned of falling away from following after God, which can only be countered by making the choice and rehearsing that choice ahead of time in your mind. As a matter of fact, he says in those famous words in Joshua 24, "As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Now, that's called commitment. Of course, you avoid decision fatigue on important things by making the decision and rehearsing that decision ahead of time so as to avoid falling behind in times of fatigue, stress, or temptation. Psalm 95 is a great example of making sure that we do not fall into the trap of making a poor decision when we're fatigued. As it says there, that it starts out with praising God. "Oh, come, let us worship and bow down. Let us kneel before the Lord, our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the sheep of his hand. Today, if you'll hear his voice, do not harden your hearts, as in Meribah, on the day that at Massah, in the wilderness, when your fathers put me to the test and put me to the proof that though they had seen my work." In other words, God says, look what you've done. Your fathers did in the wilderness. They couldn't make the right choice, they made the wrong one. So the point is, the remedy for decision fatigue is to make a plan ahead of time. So you think about it. If it comes to what you eat, you make some decisions ahead of time. I think that's what you and Amy do. You make those plans ahead of time and have things ready to go. So when you're in that down moment, when you can't make a decision, you've already made it. So it's such a helpful thing. Likewise, following God, you make your decisions ahead of time about time commitments before the time to make a decision about making a commitment. Okay. Right. Commitments involve decisions, but also commitment drives other decisions. So you live by your commitments, and your decisions will fall into place when you're at decision fatigue. It's a real phenomenon, JT.
Oh, for sure. You know, it's funny. There are times where Amy and I just and I know a lot of parents that are like this. You know, you get home, you get done with your day, you've been working hard on whatever it is that you're working. You know, as I always joke around, I'm like, man, I'm way busier at retirement than I ever was working.
You think?
Oh my gosh, yeah. I got so many different things going on. I feel like I'm juggling all the time. But the simple truth is, you know, I don't want to make a decision on dinner every night. Like Amy and I, neither one of us do. We're like, man, this is just so monotonous. Do we got to eat again? You know, you just get to the point, you got to make sure the kids have a good, nutritious meal. You got to make sure, you know, Amy's a vegetarian, so, you know, pretty much everything I cook, she's not going to eat. So I have to make sure that I come up with some kind of alternative. But the boys, you know, they like meat, and so they're both getting meat, and I eat meat. So yeah, we're kind of all over the place. So like every night, like that's our stressful decision, is like, oh man, do we have to feed these kids again? This is just getting old. It's so funny.
Well, it is, and that's where you have to make plans. And I respect the fact that you know, sometimes people do this. They really discipline themselves. I have friends that do this. They actually fix meals ahead of time to have in the refrigerators, and also different types of snacks, so that they don't fall into the trap of eating something they really don't want to do. But it really does, as we pointed out in the blog, that it really does come down to our service with God. We make those decisions ahead of time, so it's not something do we have to make that choice, right?
For sure. Yep, for sure.
But the name of the blog, of the article at BobBrubaker.com, is called Avoiding Decision Fatigue. Check it out. You'll find it there at BobBrubaker.com.
So what's happening, Bob? Anything the listeners need to know about this week?
I thought it'd be appropriate to talk about finding delight in the Lord's Day. That's another place where we make that decision ahead of time, so we're not thinking about, oh, what are we going to do this Sunday, right? We've already decided that. It's the Lord's Day.
That's
we're
right.
going to devote ourselves to worshiping God and finding rest in that day. It's a little book that I wrote, and some really appreciate to the people that have commented about it. But anyway, I've done it so that just to encourage you, the listener, and to find delight in the Lord's Day and find some practical tips for that. Finding Delight in the Lord's Day is one of the books that you'll find at BobBrubaker.com. And while you're there, check out the sermon links to the sermons that I preach at Christ Community Presbyterian Church here in Clearwater, Florida. Although JT is up yonder land. He's up in North Carolina, but here we are on the Power Break podcast, inviting you to check out the website, BobBrubaker.com.
I am in yonder land. I love it, man. It's so funny. Well, this is the Power Break podcast. I'm JT along with Bob Brubaker, and this is time on the podcast for questions and answers. If you have a question for me or for Bob, feel free to email me at jt@bobbrubaker.com, and we'll get to answering that on an upcoming Power Break podcast. So are you ready for question number 1, my friend?
I think I am. I was just, before we recorded today, I am discipling a young man by the name of Dan, and think about our times when we talked about scriptures together, and here in my office, and included that on our bike rides many times. So, this is good stuff. This is that was the preface kind of to what we took off as the Power Break podcast.
Yeah, that was it. That's how it started. Just two guys letting iron sharpen iron, and then next thing you know, it blossomed into, hey, what do you think about this? You know, and Bob, you have such a great radio voice, and you know, I have my voice, so so we were able to get that done. Yeah. I'm definitely the eye candy. You're the brains of this whole operation. But all right. So question number 1. Let's start off with that from the spiritual side of life. So do you really think Adam and Eve and others sinned in the Bible out of decision fatigue, or was it just succumbing to temptation? Because there's definitely a difference, right?
Well, there is, but they're very similar, because succumbing to temptation is actually giving into the temptation because, well, the commitment to resist the temptation has been neglected. So when a decision needs to be made to resist, well, the person just couldn't decide what to do. So when you are at that moment, we're calling it decision fatigue. Maybe you've made other choices that day. I don't know what other choices Adam and Eve would have made. Been making. Adam had already named all the animals, and maybe they were deciding which fruit to eat that day because there were so many luscious fruit trees in the garden. Whatever it was, they just let their guard down. Matter of fact, we find that as Eve mentioned that they were not allowed to eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, and they weren't even to touch it. Well, God never did say that. So maybe they had tried to make some decisions along the way, and maybe they put up additional restrictions. But the point is, when we come to a decision fatigue, it's easy just to fall away into the easy way out. It normally gives up into the wrong choice. And so I don't know about their other decisions they had made, but they were at a fatigue state. So they were at a point when the temptation of Satan came to them, they fell prey to that. I use the accounts of those who sinned in the Bible simply to make the point that we all fall prey to wrong choices at times when we are most vulnerable, unless we stick to our commitments that we've made. For the Christian, the commitment to Christ and His Word. So when you're tired or feel beaten up and temptation to satisfy your flesh in whatever manner it comes to you, you can resist if you have already made the decision as a commitment ahead of time, because those moments of decision fatigue will really hit us when we're down. I used the example of Joshua in the blog from Joshua chapter 24. Now, here's what he says in that entire verse 14 and 15. He says, "Now, therefore, fear the Lord and serve Him in sincerity and in faithfulness. Put away the gods that your fathers served beyond the river and in Egypt, and serve the Lord. And if it is evil in your eyes to serve the Lord, well, choose this day whom you will serve, whether the gods of your fathers served in the region beyond the river, or the gods of the Amorites in whose land you dwell. But as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord." Good point that we're going to make a commitment on these things, isn't it?
Yeah, I think the making the decision ahead of time, that to me has everything to do with knowing your Scripture and understanding from your time with God how you are to react to certain situations, where when you're tempted, remembering, well, God always gives me a way out, so I don't need to stress out about that. Or, when it comes to how you handle your money, well, obviously I need to honor God first, and then my family will be blessed in that honoring. So there's all these things where, like you said, if you know what you're going to do ahead of time, it really kind of gives you, I used to always say with kids, it's so important to give them a field to play on so they know where out of bounds is always. So, there's different parts of the field that they can be on, which are different decisions that they're allowed to make. But once they get to that out of bounds, that's a hard out of bounds. That's whatever happens, you can't make these decisions. And that's really kind of done well for my boys, is no matter what, like with, I just last week, Christian was dealing with something at school, and I said, well, no matter what, you can't lie about it. And he's like, oh yeah, I know that. So that's a hard thing that we've made. That's an out of bounds. No matter what, you can't lie.
Yeah.
No matter what, you can't cheat. No matter what, you can't steal. No matter what, you can't. So I think those are important to have ahead of time, because like you said, then you don't fall into those really deadly traps that end up really messing our lives up down the road.
That's exactly right. And so those decisions are made ahead of time. So when it comes to making that decision, it's already been made.
Right.
And
that's right.
That's the important part of this. Especially, we're going to talk more about other aspects of life concerning decision fatigue. But to avoid decision fatigue in your spiritual life, you make those choices ahead of time with your commitment to Christ, and how that looks And so you've already decided, going to church on Sunday is a very important part of my walk with God.
That's right.
And so I've already made that decision. So no matter what comes, I don't have to sit down and say, well, I wonder if I should go or not. But, right, it's already been made.
That's right. Absolutely. All right. So that really brings us into question number 2 from the mental aspect. So what would you say that you avoid falling prey to decision fatigue by making I'm sorry, I totally didn't get that right. So would you say that you avoid falling prey to decision fatigue by making choices ahead of time before you're exhausted? And we already talked about that, but let's talk more about it, because that's a learning process and that's a training process, right?
And a discipline process.
Right, and a discipline one, absolutely. So this is really where the rubber meets the road, right?
And we've talked about from the spiritual side of life, but exactly, I think, as you mentioned, you and Amy doing your adherence to eating well, you've made that choice. And like you said, there are some choices that you make to bring it about, but nevertheless, you've already made that choice. You're not just going to eat junk food the rest of the day.
No, would love to, believe me, but no, we're not going to.
Yeah. So you've already made that choice ahead of time. So it's like having good food on hand to make that choice, and having a meal plan in place that you don't have to make a choice when you're hungry and tired. You've already made the choice. And that goes to every aspect of life. It keeps you from falling prey to the decisions of making bad choices when you're tired, irritable, and don't know what to do. You make those choices already. You've made those commitments already. And so like with your commitment to the Lord or the local church, you don't have to make a decision when you're tired and vulnerable. As you've already made that decision, then that's a matter of living up to your commitments then and taking the steps to live out those commitments. As we mentioned, Joshua did with the people of Israel in Joshua chapter 24.
Yeah, that's right. I think about like King David. God didn't tempt King David. We get taken away by our own selfish desires when we haven't set those hard lines. We haven't prepared ahead of time for, okay, if I see this attractive woman on a rooftop, what am I going to do? Well, I'm going to look away, and I'm not going to think about that anymore, because all that's going to do is lead me down the wrong place. And as James says, God tempts no one. We get taken away by our own selfish and sinful desires. So, like you said, there's a discipline there where you set your rules ahead of time. Wasn't it Billy Graham that he had a hard rule? I will never eat with a woman, professionally, non-professionally, at a restaurant without my wife present. It will never happen.
That's a good standard for anyone to have.
Especially
especially those in ministry, but a good stand for anybody. You just make that decision ahead of time.
Yep.
Yet it is a matter of discipline, and it is important to take those steps ahead of time to make those commitments so that you live up to your commitments, which avoid those times when you're fatigued and say, what should I do? And
make a bad decision. Yeah, exactly.
You fall prey to that. By the way, back on David, he actually made a wrong choice. I guess he was deciding. It was a time when the kings went to war when he was at home. Why wasn't he there? He made the wrong choice.
He did make the wrong choice.
And then, as you mentioned, that when he was tempted, all of a sudden he sees a woman on her rooftop bathing, and instead of already making that choice, I'm going to look away. I'm not going to hang around. He made the wrong choice because maybe he was deciding a lot of budgets or something like that. I don't know, but nevertheless, the king succumbed to temptation, and there you go. And the rest is history, as it says.
I was going to say, and he certainly is not the only one that's happened to. So we just really need to be watchful because of that roaring lion that's always around the corner, as Scripture calls Satan. So we just got to keep our eyes open. All right. So question number 3, we're going to turn to the physical aspect of life as always. So let's talk about interval workouts. It's so funny that you bring it up because I just started some interval stuff. We still have not been able to ride outside because, man, this snow has taken forever to melt on the trails. So we haven't really been able to do anything. So I've been riding a little bit on the road, but up here it's pretty hard to ride on the road. just because the roads are either straight up or straight down.
Oh my. Ooh.
Yeah. But anyway, yeah, so I started on our treadmill, our new treadmill. I started to do some interval workouts. So which is better, a short workout or medium workouts? Like on the bike, 3 sets of 13 by 30 second intervals with 15-second recovery, or 4 sets of 5-minute intervals with a 2-minute and 30-second recovery. Of course, that could be adapted for running or walking or whatever it is that you guys are doing out there, swimming. The principle is short or medium length intervals where you push it for the prescribed time. Which one do you think is better, Bob?
Well, I came across a study on that, and actually, according to that recent study, the shorter intervals won. And here's why. A couple of reasons. They say that shorter intervals allowed more time at higher intensity. As the longer you go, the more you give into fatigue and start to drop the effort. Okay.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yep. Shorter intervals allow you to improve your lactate tolerance because you're able to push through it for the shorter period of time. That makes sense, too.
That makes sense, too, yeah.
And mentally, the shorter intervals reduce the feeling of threat because you know the interval's short and you're more apt to push on through it. Wow. I don't know if that means that you should only do short intervals. The answer is no, because it said that the author of the study said short intervals have their purpose, but it's also good to include the medium-range intervals as well, and even long intervals to stay balanced. What say you there, JT?
Well, what JT say is when we had to do that that testing, and you know the testing I'm talking about, an 8-minute interval is brutal. Just brutal. That's not an interval. That's just a pain cave right there.
Let's try to kill ourselves.
Yeah, man. About 2 minutes into it, I'm like, oh, I went out too fast. Then I was trying to chase my tail the whole time. That doesn't really make for good intervals. But I understand there is a purpose for both. There's a lot of times I'll go out and I'll lock myself into like a tempo interval, or just above a tempo kind of pace. And I can sit there for a pretty long period of time. But if I'm really having at it, those short intervals are great because it allows your body to adapt to recovery and quick recovery, which is what you want, right?
That's exactly right,
Yeah.
Well, that's what the study showed. And so I remember when we were doing those intervals, not just the testing of the 8 minutes, but also the intervals, remember over in Island Way Estates, we were doing probably 2.5 minute intervals.
Yeah, those were awesome.
And I noticed what happened is you'd start out fast, and then all of a sudden you would find yourself going slower because of fatigue setting in. Anyway, It's a good experience just to do the interval work. If you're running, walking, or riding, or swimming, whatever you're doing, it's good to do some interval work. Think about that as you put together your workouts or talk to your coach about that. But you'll notice this, as we always say, that it does take discipline to do those intervals, and discipline does make the difference in all aspects of life. Check out today's show notes at BobBrubaker.com. Click on the Power Break podcast. Today is show number 184.
And submit your questions by email to jt@BobBrubaker.com, and we'll get to answering your question on an upcoming Power Break podcast.
Check out the book, Finding Delight in the Lord's Day, at BobBrubaker.com. You'll click on the resources and you just go to the books and scroll through the books. You'll find it. Finding Delight in the Lord's Day, that's making a decision ahead of time that you're going to honor the Lord on His day, and you'll find some practical tips for that. Finding Delight in the Lord's Day at BobBrubaker.com.
Well, thank you for joining us for the Power Break podcast. Please subscribe and leave a review wherever you've downloaded the podcast, and check out show notes, news, Bob's weekly blog, and other cool things at BobBrubaker.com. And listen next time for the Power Break podcast.